Afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome and thank you for joining the National Academy of Education and the Southern Center for Opportunity and Access at the Southern Education Foundation for the second webinar in our three-part series addressing supportive learning environments for belonging and deeper learning. I am Micah Pate, research consultant here at the National Academy of Education, and I am pleased to welcome you to today's webinar. As people are coming in, if you can just tell us where you're from and who you are, that'll be great, and we will get started shortly. Again, welcome and thank you for joining us for our webinar today. We're going to get started really shortly. If you can please utilize the chat, tell us where you are from and who you are, and we will begin in approximately 10 seconds. Once again, my name is Micah Pate. I'm the research consultant here at the National Academy of Education, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar. I'm also joined by my colleague, Amy Berman, who is the Deputy Director at NAED and who will assist us today with our Q&A. So we're going to jump right on in for our webinar today. Thank you so much for coming into the second part of our webinar series on supportive learning environments for deeper learning. Today, we're going to be focusing on instructional practices, teaching moves that make conditions visible in classrooms. Next slide, please. Today, after introducing our speakers, we'll begin with a brief overview of the Southern Center for Opportunity and Access and the webinar series that we are partnering to present. But before we get started, I also want to note that today's presentation includes citations and references to research and resources throughout the slide deck. And so the full presentation will be shared following the webinar. So you'll have access to these citations and resources for further review. So we will then hear from Dr. Megan Franke and Dr. Richard Milner, who will share research and perspectives on instructional practices that support meaningful learning opportunities for students. We'll also hear from Dr. Jennifer Banks, who will bring a practitioner perspective to the conversation and share how these ideas can take shape in practice. And following Dr. Banks, I will share some additional examples of how these research-based ideas can translate into concrete instructional practices and learning experiences in schools and classrooms. And again, finally, we will save time for questions and answers from all of you. So please feel free to add any questions that you might have using the Q&A feature throughout the presentation. And we will get to as many of them as we can, all right? Next slide, excuse me. So I want to take some time to introduce our wonderful speakers and panel today. Dr. Jennifer Banks, she is the Executive Director of Instruction for the Washtenaw Intermediate School District, where she leads professional development across 9 school districts and 14 public school academies. A former engineer and second career educator, she brings 25 years of experience as a math and STEM teacher, instructional coach, and district leader. She earned a PhD in educational studies with a focus on urban education from Eastern Michigan University, with research examining the experiences of African-American high school students in mathematics classrooms. Dr. Banks has also contributed to STEM education through the Detroit Area Pre-College Engineering Program and the University of Michigan Summer Engineering Academy. Next, we have Dr. Megan Franke. She's a professor of education at UCLA whose research focuses on supporting teacher and student learning, particularly through mathematics instruction that centers students' thinking and expands opportunities for students who have historically been marginalized in schools. Her work bridges research and practice, including a partnership with the Los Angeles Unified School District, supporting teachers and leaders across more than 210 elementary schools and preschools. Her contributions have been recognized with the ARA Research into Practice Award, and she was elected to the National Academy of Education. Next, we have Dr. Richard Milner. He is the Cornelius Vanderbilt Chair of Education and Professor of Education at Vanderbilt University. His research focuses on urban education, teacher education, and practices that expand educational opportunities. He is a former president of the American Educational Research Association and an elected member of the National Academy of Education and the author of and editor of 8 books. Next, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Michael Pate, a research consultant with the National Academy of Education and an experienced school-based elementary school administrator with 9 years in school leadership. So throughout my career, I've led efforts to strengthen teaching and learning, expand access and opportunity for students, and really build supportive learning environments where students can thrive. My work is grounded in bridging research and practice and translating evidence into meaningful strategies that educators can use in schools and classrooms. And lastly, I want to introduce Isha Collins, who leads the Southern Center for Opportunity and Access at the Southern Education Foundation, where she oversees the center's operations and works with public school districts across 11 Southern states and Washington, D.C. to address longstanding educational disparities. A civil rights attorney and former elementary school educator, she brings a wide range of experience to this work, including serving as an Atlanta City Council member, former chair of the Atlanta Board of Education, senior director of programs for the education nonprofit Jumpstart, and senior program director for the Georgia State University College of Education. I'm now going to turn it over to Ms. Collins to share more about the Southern Center for Opportunity and Access and our partnership for this webinar series.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Pate. Appreciate everyone from joining us. We are so excited to partner with the National Academy of Education again for our second webinar. And so I just wanted to share more with you of who we are as the Southern Center for Opportunity and Access. Next slide. Yeah. And so we are one of the 4 federally funded regional equity assistance centers that support districts and districts and schools across the nation. We provide targeted, universal, and intensive technical assistance to help schools and districts strengthen educational access, opportunity, and compliance across Region 2. The biggest piece of our work and what we absolutely love is that our services are at no cost to school districts, school boards, state and local education agencies. Next slide. And so what does our work look like? It is the technical assistance that we provide comes by request. And so if any of you want additional assistance or would love to be able to partner with us, you'll submit a request to us and we focus on areas of race, sex, national origin, and religion as required by federal law. And our work looks in a variety of ways. We provide customized support, such as tailored guidance, strategic planning, training and support, professional learning, like this webinar, partner with the Academy on different opportunities for not only for educators and leaders, but also we provide universal resources like tools and strategies and materials that's available to everyone. We'll drop our information in the chat and invite you to explore more of our universal resources that we offer. Next slide. And so who do we support? Our region, as I stated earlier, and as Micah stated, we're Region 2, which the 11 states in the South, including Washington, D.C. We go as west as Texas, and of course, everything on the East Coast. Our region is home to 128 of the remaining 128 school districts that have open federal school desegregation cases, which is the basis of us as an equity assistance center. We serve 4.5 million Black students, which is more than 60% of the 7.4 million Black students in public schools that live in our region. And we serve 42% of the nation's English learners, of whom 2/3 live in Texas and Florida alone, which is also in our region. And so as we go through this webinar, we implore you to please feel free to put any questions or comments or feedback in the chat. We will share more about, share more information about the Southern Center for Opportunity and Access at the end. And I will now turn it back over to you, Micah.
Thank you so much. So as mentioned earlier, this is the second webinar in our 3-part series on supportive learning environments for belonging and deeper learning. We are recording the webinars and we'll make the presentations available following each of our sessions. So in our first webinar, I just want to set the stage. We explored the research foundations of supportive learning environments and considered how emotion, cognition, identity, and social interaction shape student learning experiences. Today, which is bolded, we're going to build on that foundation by focusing on instructional practices and the day-to-day choices educators make to shape students' opportunities to participate, engage, make meaning, and experience belonging in the classroom. Our presenters, as mentioned earlier, will help us consider how research can translate into concrete instructional practices that create meaningful and supportive learning experiences for students. And then finally, our third webinar and our final webinar will broaden the lens to examine the school and district level policies, structures, and systems that make supportive learning environments possible and sustainable for all students. Next slide, please. So before we move into today's presentations, wonderful presentations, I want to take a moment to frame a few key concepts that will help ground our conversation. Throughout the webinar series, we focus on supportive learning environments, belonging, and deeper learning. These concepts are interconnected, and the language you see here provides a shared frame for how we are thinking about them across the series. Next slide, please. Rather than treating these as fixed definitions, our goal is really just to highlight some of the key ideas from the research that can help us think about the conditions and experiences that support student learning. So as you listen to our presenters today, I invite you to consider how these concepts show up through instructional practice and the choices educators make, the opportunities students have to participate and make meaning, and the ways students experience belonging within the learning environment. So with that framing in place, we can now turn our attention to today's presenters and begin exploring what these ideas look like through instructional practice.
Thank you, Micah. Really appreciate the introduction and particularly the framing about belonging and deeper learning. I have a goal and a hope for my presentation today. My goal is that I can provide some research-based and experiential-based support to thinking about what do these words and sentences, as Micah shared, really mean? And what do they mean for us as educators in classrooms with young people? And what do they mean for schools and what it is that schools need to be thinking about? I come to this work having spent 40 plus years in classrooms with young people and leaders and teachers, as a teacher myself, as a teacher educator, as a professional developer. All of that experience has helped me think about my research and how we can do research that helps us as educators think about how to take up these ideas of belonging and deeper learning. I noticed that some of my colleagues have signed into the webinar. I'm really excited that they're here. And I want to encourage everybody to use the chat during my talk, things that you notice, questions that you have. My colleagues who are on the call, jump in and add to my ideas. I have a very short amount of time. I'm going to try and cover 3 really important big ideas. My hope for the session today is that we all can step back for a minute and think about in schools whose ideas are being seen, heard, and most importantly, valued. Those are not the same, right? Seen, heard, and valued. And whose ideas, more importantly, are not. And what does that mean for what we're going to do? We cannot wait to do something. We need to do something now. And I think this webinar is a way for us to continue to push on that agenda and think about what we can do and what we can do collectively. This is not an individual endeavor. This is a collective endeavor. So if you can go to the next slide. I want to share 3 research-based ideas today with you all. The first idea that I want to dig into is the research base that shows that students know way more than we expect them to know, or that we see that they know. And that has huge implications for who's successful in school and how we leverage young people's ideas. The second research-based idea I want to share with you is that there's extensive evidence that young people learn when they engage with each other's ideas, when they explain their own ideas, and they engage with the ideas of others. But engaging with others and explaining can mean really different things to different people. And we need to think about what are the ways in which we're enabling that actually support young people to be seen, heard, and valued. The third research-based idea I want to put on the table today is that we have that research shows that students do not have to all participate in the same ways in class in order for them to learn in deep ways. And that we need to push back on this idea that participation needs to look the same all the time for everyone. So those are the 3 things I want to talk about. What I hope that we can leave thinking about is how we can adjust our classrooms and our schools to value the diversity of young people's ideas and the partial and full and beauty in all of their ideas. So I want to turn to the next slide. And I want to start with this idea that research shows that students know more than we expect. And I want to introduce you to Scarlett. Scarlett is 4. You're going to see Scarlett in her preschool classroom. She is talking to my colleague, Angela. And Angela has asked Scarlett to count a collection of squeeze bottle tops, all the same color. And what I would like you all to do as you're watching the video is to notice what it is that Scarlett does know mathematically. What do you think she knows? Not what she doesn't know. We spend a lot of time on what kids don't know. What is it that Scarlett knows? And in particular, I want you to focus on when Scarlett finishes the task, when she does her first pass of the task and gives her first answer, what do we know about Scarlett knows? And then what do we notice after that first pass at her counting of the collection? So let's show the video. Feel free to type in the chat as you go along. What are you noticing about what Scarlett knows about the mathematics?
Do you think you can count these for me? Yeah? Yeah? There you go. You can pour them out, you can move them around, you can do whatever you want. Did you count them?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
How many do you have?
10.
Awesome. Could you count them one more time for me? Nice and loud so I can hear you.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
How many do you have?
11.
Awesome. Hey, Scarlett, can you count them one more time for me? This time, could you count them as you're putting them away back into the bag one by one?
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
How many were there?
9.
Awesome.
Awesome. It is awesome. I could talk about Scarlett all day, but I will try really hard not to. It's very hard to keep myself from noticing the brilliance of young people. I appreciate the fact that people are typing some things into the chat about what they noticed that Scarlett knew. And she does, right? And in the opening, there's some things she knows. She knows the counting sequence, right? She knows something really important, you all, which is what we call the cardinal principle. She knows that the last number word she says is the number in her collection. So when Angela asks her how many, she says, I have 10. The next time she counts, she gets 11. She says, I have 11. The next time she counts and she gets 9, she says, I have 9. That's a really powerful mathematical idea that Scarlett knows. We get to see that she knows some one-to-one correspondence. I'm not going to go into what all those things mean, but she has a lot of math knowledge. Even in that first pass, we see lots of math knowledge, but she got the answer wrong, right? And for what somebody noted, Scott, I think she double counted one, right? So the thing that I want us to be thinking about here is that if we stopped at the first pass when Scarlett said 10, we would assume that Scarlett doesn't know very much about counting, right? Without digging into the details of what Scarlett did. We also would have said we need to fix Scarlett. There's lots we need to fix here without recognizing how much knowledge Scarlett has. It's also the case that often what we see is that young people, all students actually, not just young people, the youngest people need multiple opportunities to work on a task. They need to work it through, think about it, try it again, work it through again, right? And sometimes tweaking the task just a little bit provides us a chance to see more of what Scarlett knows. When Angela asked her to put the items back in the bag, she does this beautiful counting where she has two of the tops in her hand and she carefully drops one in the bag and counts a number, drops the other in the bag and counts a number. And early on, we would have said, oh, she needs to work more on her one-to-one correspondence. You watch that and you say, hey, actually, she knows some things about one-to-one correspondence. What I want to argue about, like this underestimation of what young people know, is that this underestimation has to do with creating a space for young people to explain in ways that make sense to them, to share their ideas, to try things out, right? To play with their ideas in ways that enable us to see the full brilliance, to see the partial ideas they have, to see the full ideas they have, even if they don't sound like the way school asks her to do it. One of our first kind of attempts at school would be to ask to help Scarlett line her tops up better so that she can count them better. It turns out, you all, when we line them up in a line, students make mistakes there too, right? Because it isn't about the line, it's about the students driving it. So we can easily think, oh, gee whiz, we have this idea in our country that students come to school without any math knowledge. It turns out students know a lot if we listen to them in different ways, if we open up space for them to show us what they know. In this study here, we talked to more than 450 3 and 4-year-olds who did incredible things, right? This is not just true for young people. If you go to the next slide, we see that this is true for as people get older and older, right? And I'm not going to go into details here, except to say that Rigby here started this problem in one way, figured out I can't do that, crossed it out, but we see in that way that he understands a lot of place value. He uses those ideas then to think about how to solve this multi-digit division problem. He solves it in this very elegant mathematical way, but he makes a counting error. And instead of saying he got it wrong, we could look at all of the things that Rigby knows here. I've seen this through all of mathematics. It gets even harder in the upper grades where young people in high school don't want to share their partial ideas with anybody because they've learned not to. So paying attention to finding ways to see and hear and value the diversity of young people's ideas and their brilliance requires us to think really hard about what spaces we're creating for that and what ways our assumptions about young people are keeping us from finding out what it is that they know. If you go to the next slide, one of the ways we can find out what young people know is to really think about this idea of explaining and engaging with each other's ideas. And one of the things that is really important here is that explaining in this case does not mean that I, as the teacher, walk you through a problem and that you then tell me back what I just said. Explaining in this case, in these studies and in the work we do, means the student is explaining in their way how they're thinking about the problem, how they're going about the task, and that it's not seamless, it's often bumpy. The language isn't the math language that we encourage young people to use. They use really informal, powerful language, but their own language, right? And that there's stops and starts to it, you all, right? We have this idea that explaining should be this very clear, seamless thing. Research shows that's just not the case. It's also the case that, so let me go to the next slide really quickly so I can show you what we're learning about explaining. In this, if you hit the slide again, this graph that I want to show you, and there's no time to dig into the details, so I just want you to look at the pattern in this graph. And what this graph shows is that if you don't explain at all, which is the first column to the left, you still are learning mathematics, you all, right? But when you get a chance to explain and explain your idea in your way, right, you learn more. Right? When you get more than one opportunity in your class, right, to talk to a partner, to share in a small group, share in the whole class, any of those settings, you learn more. Explaining is learning, right? Because you're making sense of your idea, you're playing it out in all of the ways that make sense to you. Explaining matters for learning, right? Explaining also matters for us as teachers to be able to see and hear and observe the brilliance of young people so that we can value their ideas. The same is true for engaging with each other's ideas. So if you click the slides again, we'll get to see that the next chart shows engaging with each other's ideas. Often in schools, our way of asking young people to engage with each other's ideas is to say, give me a thumbs up if you agree. This form of engaging with others' ideas is great, right? But that's what you see in the first column to the left in the purple, right? Is that, yes, okay, it's good when we generally agree, disagree, but it does not really increase our learning very much. If you are engaging with the details of somebody's idea. So if I look over at Micah's work and I say, hey, Micah, I made 10s just like you did, right? I'm now engaging in the details of Micah's idea, which allows us now to have a conversation about those 10s, right? That helps me learn, and it helps Micah learn. Both of us learn in that situation, you all, not just the explainer, not just the one who's doing the listening or the engaging. We all learn, right? We learn even more if I get a chance to add on to Micah's idea and extend his idea. That leads me to even more learning. This all makes sense, right? Because the more we get to unpack our ideas, think together, work through our ideas, the more learning that is going to occur. The challenge is that we have to find time in schools and classrooms to enable this kind of engagement, where it is about the young people putting their ideas on the table, engaging with each other's ideas. And my third research idea helps us think a little bit more about that. And so if we can change to the next slide, my third research idea is that what we're also learning in our work is that participation matters, right? But that not all students participate in the same way. What we know is that participation in mathematics in the classrooms we studied, there's an arc to these lessons, right? And that we have goals as teachers of what we're trying to accomplish. And so the blue in these charts is students explaining, the green is students engaging with each other's ideas. You can see here that there's lots of explaining in these classrooms that's happening at the beginning of the lesson. That fits the teacher's goals. They're trying to get young people to explain, open up at the beginning of the lesson to share their ideas so that they can then engage with them together, right? And there's much more engaging that happens in the share out at the end of the lesson. So we have to think about our participation in relation to, and by participation here, I'm talking about explaining and engaging with each other's ideas, right? That it happens in really different places in the classroom. And what is really important for this and really surprised me in our data is the next slide. And this next slide shows you 6 young people. These 6 young people all have the same high level of math achievement in their class. All of them are awesome mathematicians and are doing quite well in mathematics. Their participation looks very different across math class. And if I were to show you the whole class, everybody's participation looks a little bit different, which is a really powerful idea, you all, because it's helping us see that we don't have to get everybody to look like Gerardo. Gerardo there in the middle is the student we say, oh, that's what we want. We want everybody to be engaged all the time during all parts of the lesson. And we're going to really work to get them all there, right? And then we ask them to do things that are uncomfortable, that don't fit the way that they think, that don't feel like they get to share of themselves, right? If you look at Nico does not explain or engage with each other's ideas in the share out part of the lesson, but Nico's learning. And he's finding other spaces to share his ideas and to engage with the ideas of others, because we know that's helpful for his learning, right? If you look at Noemi, one of the things that's really interesting about Noemi and students like her is she rarely participates in the whole class. Those 2 very low bars in her chart are whole class participation. The other parts are during turn-in talks, right, pair shares, or during collaborative problem solving time in a triad or a pair. So Noemi, if you were to only have whole class, would have a much harder time figuring out where she's going to participate during math class. What this data says to me is that we need to think about, what kind of spaces are we providing in math class, and what does that mean? And how are we creating ways for students to participate in ways that work for them, not the ways I want them to? So I want to go to the last slides, which are kind of getting down to the nitty-gritty of what this means. What does this mean for practice? What I want to ask you to think about is we have to focus on what students do know, not what they don't know. We have to stop marking everything wrong, and say, why aren't we circling the things they did really brilliantly and smartly? Because everybody does brilliant, smart things somewhere, right? We need to find those correct ideas in the things that students are doing. They are there. We need to share with the principals and our colleagues the smart, thoughtful things our students are doing so we can create a culture that's about the brilliance of our young people. And we shouldn't expect everybody's ideas to look and think the same, right? I talked some about the range of spaces that we need to create and how we create these different spaces. I want to just highlight this. We tend to ask all students the same questions, and follow-up questions that are the most powerful, you all, are the questions that we watch, we observe, we listen, we see something that students do, and we ask them about that. Oh, Micah, we saw that you made groups there. Can you tell me about those groups? Those questions are really powerful for letting students share their ideas. We need to keep wondering who's participating and why. Last slide. This can't be all about classrooms. It cannot be all about teachers and young people, interactions in and outside the classroom. It has to be about what we do in schools, because schools are shaping what's happening for young people and for teachers. We need to think about the ways in which school structures privilege speed and accuracy and what gets left out then. We need to think about, what does it actually mean to reteach when all students have some knowledge to bring? What does it mean? How are we assessing in ways that show all of what Scarlett knows, right? What are we saying to parents, or how are we evaluating teachers? We need to think about the ways in which schools are working and districts are working to think about how are we valuing that we need these range of spaces for students to share their idea. Is my goal to follow the curriculum, or is my goal to use the curriculum to teach young people? And those are very different things, and very different things for centering and valuing students' ideas. And the last thing I want to say is there any place in a school where the diversity of ideas is highlighted and valued? It's only with really valuing the diversity of young people's ideas and drawing on all the richness that they have that we're going to be able to solve the big challenges that face us as a society and as a world. And we have to do it. So I want you all to keep thinking about that. I am going to turn my part over to Dr. Milner.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. And Megan, that was incredible. I learned so much from you, and it is an honor to follow you. I want to also just acknowledge Dr. Pate in particular for inviting me, and for others responsible for my being here. And a major shout out to all the practicing teachers who do the really important work of supporting young people every single day. So thank you so much. I come into this work as a former high school English teacher, and someone who has also taught on the community college level. I taught developmental reading in that space, and I've conducted research, classroom level research in middle and high schools, particularly in social studies and middle school classrooms. And so what I want to do is have a sort of think about this notion of addressing what I've come to call opportunity gaps. So three recommendations I want to make. The first is that we have to anchor curriculum practices for students in the room, right? Those young people with whom we are working, and also to draw from data from which we know can be substantive and be transformative with the young people with whom we're working. I also invite you in the chat, please respond. I want you to provide feedback. It's very difficult to do these talks when we don't have people who are sort of giving us that real-time feedback. So I welcome you to provide feedback as I'm sharing. Secondly, understanding and disrupting what I've come to call punishment practices, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then thinking about instructional practices that can lead to what is known as social action. So the first point I want to make here is really around thinking about curriculum practices for students who are actually in the room. I'm drawing here from Elliot Eisner, who was a professor at Stanford University, when I think about this notion of curriculum. And by curriculum, all I mean is what students have the opportunity to learn. But I also want to stress that students experience a curriculum, and we all experience a curriculum in our home. Students experience a curriculum when they are on the bus, driving to and from school. They experience a curriculum or curriculum practices on the playground and so forth. So the curriculum can be seen as explicit when we write it down and we know we're teaching it. A second form of the curriculum is what's known as the implicit curriculum. And the implicit curriculum is really fascinating because the implicit curriculum is a curriculum that we sometimes know we're teaching, but at other times we're not really sure we're teaching it. Right. So we don't write it down. So an implicit example of a curriculum might be if a principal were to ask a teacher to send 3 strong boys to the office to carry books back to the classroom. There's a learning opportunity embedded in that, but it's implicit, and I suspect it was not intentional. Right. So, and then the most fascinating form of the curriculum is what I want us to spend our time thinking about. And that's the curriculum that's known as the null curriculum. And the null curriculum is the curriculum that students experience based on what they are not exposed to. Like, what do you mean, Rich? What I mean is that when students are not exposed to particular kinds of language or particular kinds of engagement in the classroom, they are they experience a particular kind of learning opportunity, and that tells them something about what is and who are actually important in those spaces, right? So I remember when I lived in Pittsburgh, I used to direct the Center for Urban Education at the University of Pittsburgh. And I remember when, I know if those of you who remember the synagogue shooting that took place in Pittsburgh years ago. And I remember when the synagogue shooting took place, most of the teachers did not address the synagogue shooting at all, right? It was, although it was weighing heavily on students' minds and students were engaging, they were looking at, the news media and reading and hearing. Schools typically did very little to address the synagogue shooting. In that way, students were experiencing what might be known as the synagogue, what might be known as a null form of the curriculum. In a very similar way, when we tell vis-a-vis federal mandates or otherwise, or we tell students that they should not be experiencing or talking about other curricular learning opportunities that they're facing in the real world, we're also teaching that through the null curriculum. So, for example, I don't know, for those of you who may have remembered the Pulse nightclub shooting years ago in Orlando, Florida, right? Where the people were shot and killed in a nightclub. Gay, bisexual, transgender communities were deeply affected, right? But in schools, what we typically did was we thought about the Pulse nightclub shooting through the null curriculum. So students are learning something about what is important and about who is actually important in these spaces. What the research also shows us is that the communities who attempt suicide at the highest rate tend to be those from trans communities, right? So young people or people in general who are in trans communities are those who experience who attempt suicide at the highest rates, right? So when you're thinking about making data-driven decisions, you make data-driven decisions in some respects based on what we know, what the data are telling us related to whether or not young people will continue trying to thrive and live in a society that pushes them to the margins. And so what I want to do is bring to your attention this notion called vicarious trauma. And vicarious trauma is different from secondary trauma. I'm trying to sort of delve into this more deeply from the health sciences. And what vicarious trauma tells us is that I can be experiencing a level of emotional strain and emotional anxiety based on my connections to traumatic experiences outside of my localized community, right? So I don't know about you, but young people the schools in which I do my work, young people typically have a cell phone, right? So their messaging then shows up instantly, right? Back in the day when I was in school, I watched the news at 6 o'clock and I watched the news at 10 o'clock, right? Michael, you probably don't remember that. You're too young. But for those of us who remember news that was fed, through those channels, you now understand that students are getting a feedback based on things that are happening throughout the world almost instantly, right? And so when a student comes in and is upset or is disengaged and so forth, they may be experiencing what health scientists are called vicarious trauma. And vicarious trauma says if a person has experienced some form of trauma in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I live in Nashville, Tennessee, I still could be experiencing some form of trauma because of my connection to the body that's been traumatized, right? And so we have to be mindful of mental health and how mental health shapes students' learning opportunities, how mental health manifests in ways that as educators, we're literally trying to address and provide the kinds of supports and the kind of mechanisms that allow students to bring their entire beings into the space. We talk about normal stresses of life. Normal, of course, is relative, right? And so when we think about what the data tell us about carcerality and so forth, we realize that about 70%, for instance, of all young people who are experiencing the carceral system has experienced some form of a mental health challenge. What these data suggest is that we don't need more SROs, or we don't need more police officers on campus. What we really need are more counselors, and what we need more psychologists, and we need more support mechanisms and systems to be able to support challenges young people may be experiencing. The data also show that about 1 in 5 young people, one of 5 people in the carceral system has experienced some form of severe mental health, and about 1 in 4 of every police encounter is a result of someone with a mental health challenge. And what's really important about this is we're talking about the people who experience the violence. These data don't account for the police officers themselves who might be accounting for or dealing with some form of mental health challenge. What does this mean for what we're doing in education? We know for sure there's a direct link between what we know about push out and what we know about suspensions and expulsions and carcerality. So there's this research that talks about a school to prison pipeline. There's a direct link between young people who are pushed out of school and those who end up in the carceral system. Ways to address trauma and to address various forms of grief and stress. We know from very sound research, three ways we do it. One is we have to expose students to literature across different areas that allow them to see themselves in those situations that they may be grappling with, writing about what they're experiencing, and also talking, right? The discourse, the power of having those conversations. I also want to bring in the work of Rudine Sims Bishop, who talks about the importance of the curriculum being a mirror, a window, and a sliding glass door. What that research tells us is that the curriculum should, of course, reflect who students are. The curriculum should also be a window so that students have an opportunity to engage with those experiences outside of themselves, outside of the context in which they work and live, but also the curriculum should be a sliding glass door. And the sliding glass door is an opportunity for young people to move between spaces where the cognitive rigor is sometimes incredibly intense when they understand or they can relate to what's happening based on their own identity and their own experiences, but also based on what they might be experiencing in a new form, in a new way. The second piece I want to talk about here is related to what we might think about related to what I've come to call punishment practices, right? We have a problem with thinking about pushing students out who may not as Megan has said earlier, engage in the way we think they should engage, right? I want to be clear here that there is a difference between how we might think about punishment and how we might think about discipline. Don't leave this presentation saying that Rich said that we should not be cultivating discipline. In fact, we should be trying to cultivate discipline. The challenge is how we are obsessed in some ways with punishment, right? So we know when young people are not in the classroom, and we can look at the data and we see certain young people, students who live below the poverty line, students whose first language is not English, Black and brown students typically are referred to the office at alarmingly high rates, and they miss important instructional time. And the educational psychologists, such as Pat Edwards and Anita Woolfolk-Hoy and so forth, they've made it very clear to us that time on task is essential to getting the kind of outcomes that we need. Research also tells us that Black and brown students tend to be referred to the office for subjective infractions, vis-a-vis you're too loud, you're too disrespectful. White students tend to be referred to the office for what's known as objective infractions. What do I mean by that? I look at my digital clock, it's 1 o'clock. You're supposed to be here at 12:55. That's more of an objective infraction, right? And so until we understand that these practices are manifest it's going to be very difficult for us to be able to address them. One of the first things you can do in your class is look at and assess who's being pushed out, who is being sent to the office, and for what reason. We also know that teachers, those of you in the classrooms, are so important, because what the research tells us as well is that infractions tend to originate on the classroom level. And they originate on the classroom level most of the time for non-compliance. What do you mean, Rich Milner? I mean non-compliance vis-a-vis you don't have your belt on, or you didn't raise your hand, right? So all of these things we know are important, but they really impact the ways in which students can experience education. Let me tell you a quick story. I'm looking at my time here. I know I'm running out, so I'll tell you a quick story. These are the most beautiful young ladies in the world. These are my daughters. They are twins. My poor mama still can't tell them apart. They are very different. Although they're identical twins, they're very different. One of them, if I were to give them both a math worksheet with 20 math problems, one of them is going to do 6, right? She's going to say, Dad, I figured this math worksheet out. Number 5 is like number 4. Number 8 is like number 6. Number 10 is like number 20. The other one is going to do 26, right? Because she's a pleaser. She's going to say, Dad, look, I made up some math problems, right? Now, guess which one of them you think has the higher IQ, right? You put it in the chat, 6 or 26. I'll tell you really quickly. 6, right? Because 6, you all, wants to be educated. 26 is fine with being schooled. There's a difference between being schooled and being educated. I remember, I would tell you a story about that, but I can't. I have to continue. But just very briefly. So I will share these slides. There's a difference between being disciplined and building punishment. Punishment is excluding, pushing out, teaching to the test, right? Discipline is focusing on cognitively rich and rigorous curriculum practices and so forth. And I will share these slides with you later so that you can get your head around how we might think about discipline and punishment and differences, right? I've also talked about very recently in a paper published in 2026 around this notion of curriculum punishment. And it's a really important paper because I talk about how punishment manifests in 5 ways: when we avoid, when we script, that is not having students actively engaged in the discursive interactions that we have going on, when we narrow the curriculum, when we push out certain kinds of curriculum opportunities, when we distort, and when we ban. And then finally, the last part here, as I have 3 minutes, I know, is really around thinking about curriculum practices related to what might be seen as social action. The lowest form, and I'm drawing here from the powerful work of multicultural educators and researchers, namely Jim Banks here. But when we think about what we know for sure is that curriculum practices are so important when we think about the school environment in general. So I think we all agree that curriculum practices are not only what happens in schools, but curriculum shows up in the posters we have on the walls. I remember, sometimes I go into places, I go into universities and I see on the walls in university, let's say administrative buildings, and I see on the walls that, there are only white men represented on the walls, right? For people who are donors or folks who have been presidents of institutions and so forth, right? They don't have, indigenous communities from whose the land was stolen, right? They don't have Black communities from people who physically built these places, right? And, so we focus in on curriculum matters of people we believe are important. So we talk about these contributions on a low level, and to me, that's the lowest level of how we might think. A level that's a little bit higher is we might talk about, and we'll say we're not going to have one lesson related to contributions, right? We're going to have an approach where we're going to have a whole week of women's rights, right? We're going to have a whole month of Black history, right? Still low level. But when we change, the transformative approach says we change our minds about what we believe to be germane. We reform the entire curriculum so that everybody, all of our identity spaces are manifest in curriculum and learning opportunity. Now, the highest form of curriculum is social action. How do we use what we know to allow students to use and become altruistic in a way, to use what they know to be transformative? Sometimes I walk into classrooms and I'll ask students, what are you doing? What are you guys doing in here? And students will say, oh, we don't do anything. We don't do nothing in here, right? And the teacher is like, what? What do you mean? I'm sweating. I've worked hard on this lesson, right? What students mean is they really want to be involved in using what they have or using what they know to be able to do something beyond responding to whatever that pre-assessment is. I had a video that I'd like to show, but I can't do that, but I will share it with you later. Here are the anchors you might use related to try to get students to engage in discourse. But I will conclude by saying that I really don't believe we have an achievement gap at all. What I believe is that we have a vulnerability gap and a joy gap, and we have a civil discourse gap, and we have a mental health gap, and we have a school counseling gap, and we have an assessment gap. I don't believe we have achievement gaps at all. What I really believe is we have hope gaps, and we have gaps in funding and resources, and we have gaps in early childhood education, and we have geography of opportunity gaps and higher education gaps and community school connection gaps, and we have empathy gaps. And I don't believe we have achievement gaps. I believe we have pop culture and hip hop gaps, and we have research gaps, and we have what I've come to call opportunity gaps. Thank you so much, and I look forward to engaging with you later.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am so excited to be here and so honored. I just want to say thank you to Dr. Rich Milner, who I've worked with for the past, I don't know, almost 9, 10 years at this point, in some capacity, and for getting me into the space. So, my name is Dr. Jennifer Banks. I am Executive Director of Instruction for Washington Intermediate School District in Michigan. And so I'm just gonna want to take some time just to show some things that we have been doing in practice with teachers and with students. I loved at the beginning when Megan talked about the whole idea that our students are brilliant, right? They walk into the classroom with a genius. They know more than a lot of us in a lot of different areas that we don't know because we haven't lived their experience. We haven't been a part of their communities. We haven't been in their families. So they come in baked in genius. And so how do we create space for them to be able to show their genius, and also believe in their own genius and believe in their identity of what they can and cannot do? Uh-oh, I'm not, okay, next slide. Sorry. And so this idea of creating a classroom where we can showcase students' genius will require teachers to move from compliance to a shift to genius, right? Which means we're going to have to let go of some control. And as a teacher myself, I remember I could plan a lesson. I would plan it for 45 minutes, but the plan would probably be more like an hour and a half, just in case something got out of whack. I had something else that I can pull out of my bag. And it was more about controlling the space versus letting the kids be free to explore and build upon the knowledge that's in the room. And so this requires seeing students as bearers, particularly when we think about mathematics, as bearers of knowledge. Now, can they engage in a debate around mathematical concept? Can they challenge one another? The teacher does not have to be the sole bearer of knowledge. It also requires us to value students' full selves. And when I say value students' full selves, who parents send their absolute best to you every day, right? It is their most precious gift that they have given to you as teachers, as educators, to help grow and support. And so, how do we create a space in the classroom for students to have the opportunity to show that, right? I think about the kid that, does like the beats on the desk. I used to have a kid who used to do that all the time and slightly drove me crazy. And then one day it clicked to me, well, that's mathematics. He's making patterns all day long. I wonder if you could write a linear equation for that. Is it linear? Maybe it's a quadratic, right? The challenge for him actually pulled him into the conversation. So thinking more broadly about what students bring to the classroom and using it as a way to impact instruction. And then lastly, for this one, is teachers are facilitators of knowledge. And again, the space of a classroom, there are 20, 25, 30 geniuses in the room that can, all teachers need to do is to be able to facilitate the conversation, help facilitate the questions to ask, to pull the knowledge out. How do we get students to actually demonstrate their knowledge in interesting ways? It doesn't have to be one way fits all. How do we get them to think about different perspectives and to value different perspectives? And then how do we teach them how to challenge one another in respectful ways? We can go to the next slide. And then thinking about questions, in mathematics, it's interesting. When I was doing my dissertation, I interviewed 23 students across Southeastern Michigan around their experiences in the math classroom. And I had students that were really high achieving to students that struggled. I had students in the urban districts and suburban districts. And what was so interesting to me consistently was that kids are like, yeah, we don't talk in math. It's not a conversation. Like the teacher gives the lecture, we do the problems. I mean, we might check each other's papers every now and again, but for the most part, there's no conversation in mathematics. And so even students who were excelling in math found no joy in mathematics because it was impersonal. There was no personal connection. How do we begin to think about the mathematics classroom as a place where there's conversation happening all the time, where math talk is not, or number talk isn't just an elementary concept, it's a middle school, it is all throughout their K-12 experiences. And how do we ask questions that challenges students to look at mathematics more broadly outside of the four walls of their classroom? How do you apply mathematics to your community? I mean, when I think about some of my students, one of the projects we would do is they had to design a tennis shoe. Oh, well, how are you supposed to do that? Let's get some graph paper, right? And they start drawing and making lines, and they're literally playing. And then they're bringing in, oh, okay, well, how would I write that equation for this line? How might I write equation for this quadratic? Right? They're beginning to use the mathematics after they have already constructed something that was interesting to them. So how do we use their own interests to engage them in the mathematics? And then thinking about like how do you use math to solve a community problem? And I'll kind of get to that at the later end of one of the things we've been doing is called our Meaningful Mathematics Showcase. And I'll kind of get to that momentarily. Can we go to the next slide? Another strategy that I have used and I have found to be super helpful is for students to take a stand. There has been so much going on in our world. Like there's a plethora of options of things to explore in our community. It does not take much. And so when I think about, for instance, we did a summer institute during the pandemic with students. And we simply asked students, why they keep showing this bell curve on the news during the pandemic? What is this curve really talking about? And the whole idea of kids beginning to question and to ask questions relative to that led to the mathematics. And so how do we help? And some of this, I'm gonna be honest, some of this requires teachers to not be afraid to engage in difficult conversations because some of it's uncomfortable. When we talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, if we talk about trans students and then gay, like some of this is gonna be uncomfortable. And as teachers, we have to be okay with holding the space. We don't necessarily have to put our views into the space, but allow kids to explore and then provide data to validate their arguments. How do you collect data? How do you analyze it? What patterns have you seen? What assumptions do we need to challenge? How do we compare solutions and revise our thinking? Next slide. And so one of the ways, I kind of touched on this, that we have been trying to create space for students to showcase their genius is through the Tri-County Cultural Responsive Mathematics Institute. It's our Meaningful Mathematics Showcase, and we've been doing this now for 5 years. And it is a partnership with three countywide districts, which Washtenaw ISD is one of the countywide districts, but also with Oakland Schools and Wayne Resa. This year we had nearly 1,200 students. It was a 2-day event, 1 day for middle school students, 1 day for high school students. And as I shared, this was our largest event. But at this event, students have the opportunity to engage in math and STEM activities. They also have the opportunity to showcase their own project. And we use Dr. Gholdy Muhammad's framework around identity, skills, intellect, criticality, and joy as a framework for students to develop their project. You can go to the next slide. And our purpose is really to develop new skills around mathematics. And when we say new skills, the skills you already have, but you're actually applying it in real life scenario. Like, oh, I never even considered that that could be exponential functions, could be something that might align with my hair growing and when I go out in the humidity. Um, we want students to reflect and to strengthen their relationship with mathematics. We want students to see themselves as mathematicians. Like, I can do this. We want to expand and analyze real issues in their community, in the world overall. And we want them to be able to use mathematics to solve injustices and transform social imbalances. And most important is what we want students to have joy. Next slide. And so this is just kind of over the past 2 years, some of our students, and as I have shared, there has to be a willingness to allow students to explore whatever. Some of our posters have been, really safe in terms of, okay, we're analyzing a Rubik's Cube. This is my favorite game to play. But we've had posters on kidnapping. We've had posters on suicide. We've had posters on sexually transmitted diseases. There has to be a willingness to allow kids to go where they need to go, to explore ways that they don't necessarily get to do, haven't been able to do in a traditional classroom. And next slide. And this is just a short video because while I can speak to the impact of the showcase, I think students explain it better than I ever can. So we can go ahead and show the video. We don't have any sound though. And we still have no sound. That's unfortunate. Okay, well, I will.
You know what, Dr. Banks, I hate to interrupt. We'll be sure to make this video available to everybody that's on the presentation afterwards, since it doesn't sound like the sound is working. And I know everybody will want to see it.
Okay, well, that was all I have for you, and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Banks. I appreciate it. And so, again, my name is Micah Pate. I am currently a principal at Cooper Lane Elementary School, located in Maryland. And today I'm just going to talk to you about creating the conditions for deep learning. And so, for me and my perspective is, I really want to speak to what it actually looks like to create the conditions for deep learning in a school building. Because we are in the thick of it with the daily practices, and so everything that I'm sharing today is really just coming from what we're living out right now here at Cooper Lane. We are next slide, please. We are a school that serves roughly 387 students. We're a Title I school, community school. So we received additional funds to really just support different initiatives and provide wraparound services for not only our students, but our community as well. Nearly half of my students are multilingual learners. And so, and then we have about 8.8% of the students receiving special education services. And I share these numbers just because they matter, right? And deep learning, it can't be reserved for schools with fewer barriers. And not saying that these are barriers, but if anything, the conditions that I'm about to describe matter more in buildings like my building, which is completely diverse, where students are carrying a lot. And so where the stakes for getting instruction are extremely high, and making sure that we have strong tier 1 instruction every single day with high quality teaching and learning. Next slide. So I'm going to talk to you more so really just about building the condition. And so first things first, as a school-based leader, leadership creates the structures that make great instruction possible. So at Cooper Lane, this means that 4 things are working together. First, Megan's talked about earlier the time and the space, and Jennifer and Rich, we all talked about honoring the spaces for deeper learning. And for me here at Cooper Lane is just protected collaborative planning, making sure that teachers have real guarded time to plan together, to do root cause analysis, to really find out what are the next bite-sized actionable steps to support student learning. Second, student work analysis. Here at Cooper Lane, our teachers regularly sit with student work side by side, just really looking closely at what students are actually understanding, making sure that the instruction is being presented in a manner that assists with the varying learning styles within the building. Not just thinking about what the student's grade was on a particular assignment, but really going deeper and really examining where the productive struggle, and pushing students to really grapple, collaborate, and really just see where they could, continue to grow and also continue to refine and hone in on their learning. The third thing is learning walks. That is a practice that we have implemented here, where we are moving through classrooms together as a staff, right? Common language, same mindset. We are all aligned, watching instruction in real time, and then providing coaching and feedback, because, there's, as a few of my colleagues mentioned earlier, there are competing interests and barriers. And so making sure that our blinders are being assessed, and making sure that there's a shared understanding of what strong practice looks like inside of the building. And then the last thing, the fourth point, is really just common expectations. And so around classrooms, students, recognize the routines and the rigor, whether they are in one room or another. So there's some instructional alignment with, this is our non-negotiables. This is what we are planning to do to make sure that, one, students feel seen, students feel valued, and students feel heard as well. And so none of this work is glamorous. It gets messy. We go through a lot of plan, do, study, act cycles, where we're making sure that we have a strategy or change a strategy, and we test it out. And sometimes things work and sometimes it doesn't work. But then going back to the conditions for us to really examine the work that we're doing, collaborative planning, making sure that we are coming together as an entire staff and assessing, what's working well and what do we need to change as the leaders. Next slide, please. So as my colleagues talked about earlier, the design for deep learning, once the conditions are in place, the next question is like, what are we actually asking students to do? And here's a shift that we made at Cooper Lane. Instead of designing for compliance, we designed for thinking. And so that means we're not simply just asking students to simply complete a task. We're asking them to explain their thinking, whether it's orally, whether it's in written form. Instead of just producing answers, we ask them to justify it. We have accountable talk stems that really assists with being able to challenge and disagree respectfully, but also be able to learn those advocacy skills of getting your point across in a manner that is receptive to your audience. But we build in real-time collaboration. As you can see, one of these pictures, this is we do a bulletin board walk where some of the teachers walk around and we critique the bulletin boards around the schoolhouse. And so that's a cool way this is, I think, a 5th grade classroom. it's a cool way for them to sort of see what their peers are presenting, what they're doing, and have those deeper conversations so they're able to, again, working on explaining, justifying, collaborating, questioning, revising, and reflecting. And so here at Cooper Lane, you can see students are just not receiving the information, they're wrestling with it together. And that's something that, that has been a culture shift here, is that whole productive struggle piece, making sure that we're not overly scaffolding the instruction, but making sure that we are putting the right supports in place at the right time so that students are building upon their learning. Additionally, here, this is what we feel like deep learning looks like. It's making sure that our scholars are capable, even from, our service all the way down to pre-K up until 5th grade, and making sure our early learners have those foundational skills for them to be, successful and be able to advocate and be able to express their ways throughout the schoolhouse and also at home in life as well. Next slide. But in order to continue to do this, again, teachers are the most important variable, one of the most important variables when it comes to teaching and learning and student achievement. And so none of this is possible without investing in teachers as learners themselves, the adult learners in the building. And so deep learning, for students requires deep learning for adults. And so here at Cooper Lane, our professional learning follows, again, a consistent cycle. Teachers practice a strategy, they get real feedback on it, and then they reflect on what worked well, and what did not. And then they take it directly into the classroom for implementation. And so, as I mentioned early around like the Plan, Do, Study, Act model that we use here, this is not like a one-time training model. So it's a cycle, and we continue to repeat it so that teachers' growth is continuous rather than a single event just on a calendar. And so the photos here just capture the work that we're sitting together with administration, together with materials in hand, actively building the teachers' capacities rather than, sitting and getting in a presentation. Next slide. And so a big part of our culture is treating like our instructional problems the way that scientists treat a hypothesis, essentially. And so we use a protocol called the 5 whys to get to like the root causes of challenges rather than reacting to just surface symptoms. And so the important part is not the template itself, it's just how our teachers enact it. And it's really cool because we've started this model with the teachers, but it's also trickling down to our students as well, for them just to ask and challenge, but why? To get to uncover those additional layers and to be able to have them take ownership of their learning. And so really quickly, our teachers took this protocol into their own collaborative planning time. Instead of stopping at the surface level explanations, like for example, someone would say students are not engaged, teachers will push each other back and forth, asking just a simple question, why? One more layer down, then again, asking why, until we've landed on something that we can actually change in our own practice, right? And so that means uncovering maybe the gaps in how a concept was maybe introduced or missing a structure for students. And so, Rich talked about all of the plethora of gaps that can occur within the school community. And so it really allows us to have those deep, rich conversations in order to provide that high quality instruction. And so on the left right here, you can see what it looks like downstream, like a classroom anchor chart capturing student thinking around a math concept, full of words like you see struggle, complicated, mistakes, perseverance. And so the chart itself is students doing the same, kind of thinking that their teachers model, but naming what is hard, working through it, and then really just reflecting on it. So that essentially allows us to have that continuous, inquiry process when it comes to improving instruction. Next slide, please. And so, we've had opportunities to discuss as a leadership team here, like, what do students experience every day? And so the student experience is at the instructional core, it's at the center, right? We want to make sure that we're starting with students um, and making sure that they feel like this work belongs to them, right? That changes the game for our students. Belonging. Does the student feel like they are valued part of this classroom community? The collaboration piece at the bottom left. Does the student have real opportunities to think alongside others? And then lastly, the reflection. Does the student have the space to look back on their own thinking and grow? That whole reflective piece. And so the line at the bottom of the slide just captures, again, our philosophy here. And, at my school, all teachers are called instructional leaders because we're all leaders in our own right. We all have expertise. And so leadership creates the conditions. Teachers continue to create the experiences while students do the thinking. And each layer for me here, with just reflecting on uh, my tenure here at my school, is that each layer sort of depends on the one before it, right? Leadership, building the capacity of the leader, the capacity of the teacher, which ultimately impacts and builds the capacity for students, right? So next slide. And I just wanted to close out with just leadership lessons. These are things that I've learned just as a principal. Again, starting with students, not programs. It's really easy for me to adopt a new initiative, but it's harder and more important to start every decision with the actual students that are in front of me. Building teacher capacity before expecting different outcomes. I can't ask for new results from teachers who have not yet been given the support to produce them. And so I don't know if we have many educators on the call, but really just continue to advocate for professional development, coaching, feedback to assist with building, your capacity. As a principal, creating structures that support collaboration. And so not the collaboration that we're just coming together and we're looking at an agenda. I'm talking about collaboration where people are having those uncomfortable conversations, those courageous conversations, where we're getting to the root of the problem so that we can be a bit more successful. I've learned that collaboration just doesn't happen because you tell people to collaborate. You have to unpack people's whys, their feelings, how they are approaching education, and making sure that there's a common alignment to move forward. Again, a saying that I say in my building: ground your statements in evidence. What I got from a mentor as well. Use data to ask better questions, but not to assign the blame. It should open up our conversation, and it shouldn't close it. And finally, deep learning requires psychological safety, belonging, and high expectations. So all three together, it can't be in isolation, not one at the expense of other. And so ultimately, that's the work here at Cooper Lane. Of course, it's not finished. We have a lot to do, and a lot more individual goals and plans that we need to enact, and shifting things. But it's real, it's ongoing, and I just hope that this gives you something practical to carry into your own buildings as we're starting the new academic school year. So thank you for your time.
So we are going to jump into Q&A, and you guys all did such an amazing job that nobody has questions for you, but I have a question, and maybe we could take down this slide and just highlight the speakers. So I have a question that I feel like is sort of coming up in some of the chats and so forth that we're seeing. And so we're seeing people write all things about what you all have said, and some of it, me taking notes on what you said. I think when Rich was listing the opportunity gaps, somebody wrote something about so classrooms should be spaces of liberation. And when Megan was talking about circle the brilliances instead of always marking what is wrong, and giving her a wonderful example about Scarlett. We saw people write about pulling information out of students. And Jennifer talked about we want students to have joy. And Micah's talked about designing for, not designing for compliance, but designing for deep thinking. But at the same point in time, there's this tension, right? That a lot of you had mentioned. Rich talked about like teaching to the test and problematizing standardized tests, and Megan talked about schools privileging accuracy. And so my question is, I'm hoping that the two researchers on the call could just give something short that makes everybody feel good, that if we do this collaboration and we do this reflection and we're not always marking what is wrong, our kids are still going to be prepared for these standardized tests. And then for Jennifer and Micah, like, what do you say to, the brand new teacher who is in a classroom that requires standardized tests, right? So you're K-8 or you're once in high school. Like, how do they start to do this? Like, how do they get away from being really scared of like, I've got to say every single thing on the sheet. I've got to give them worksheets. I've got to make sure that they can add this up. And I've got to mark what's wrong because it's going to be wrong on the standardized test. So like I said, if the researchers could give us a little bit of the research stuff, and the people in the schools could sort of say like, this is where I would tell people to start, that would be wonderful.
So, Megan, is it okay if I start? Yeah. So I think the first thing that's really important is that each of us is a data collector in our own way. And so when we think about, and let me be clear, I understand the pressures that educators or practitioners are under, and that part of the work and the role is to prepare our young people to be successful on these exams and so forth. But what I also think is important is that educators, practitioners, or teachers are very deliberate about identifying artifacts and points of growth that they're able to demonstrate outside of those spaces, and being able to tell those stories outside of those data points. And so when teachers identify growth, or when they see promise, or whatever those areas are, being able to articulate that growth and learning that may never show up on an exam is so important, right? And being able to articulate that not only to the students themselves, which I think is incredibly important, but also being able to identify that those areas of growth and learning in a real way through artifacts, through videos, through whatever it is that you might need to demonstrate that growth to principals, to community members, and so forth, are also important. One of the other areas I'll mention very quickly when I talk about this idea of curriculum punishment is scripting, right? And so, scripting is important to a degree, especially for teachers who are earlier in their career and so forth, and they may need some framework to be able to get. But the responses that I think are really important is that we are very clear that students are not the only ones being punished here, but teachers are as well, right? And so that we've got to build a repertoire so teachers are well equipped to be able to provide the kind of data points that are necessary for student learning and development outside of whatever the traditional mechanisms might be.
I so appreciate that response, Rich. I'm glad that you went first, because one of the things I'm hearing from Rich here, you all, is that standardized tests are one form of assessment of young people. And yes, like in the work that I do in mathematics, if you're a really good problem solver, you're going to be able to navigate the standardized test, right? If we can support everybody to be really good problem solvers, they're all going to be able to navigate that. But the standardized test is designed for a particular purpose. And I think what Rich is asking us to think about is what other measures are going to help us show the brilliance along the way. Not everybody gets to the same place at the same time. We need to have measures that also show, oh, Megan's making progress. She isn't quite fully there in terms of one-to-one correspondence, but boy, she knows stuff beyond what she's supposed to know as well, right? And so I think we just have to think about what are the different kinds of ways that we can demonstrate that knowledge, and recognize that we need to, if we're working on these things in real serious ways, all of our students are going to be able to tackle what it means to do that kind of a test and what it means to solve those kinds of problems. Mostly, sometimes those tests are hard for wrong reasons, but just to be really clear.
I guess I can jump in from a practitioner point of view. I think one of the things to think about, and I know this is hard, but as a teacher, there's so many outside stressors that can come and kind of distract you. Ignore it and focus on the kids. Focus on teaching and teaching well. When we talk about deep learning, particularly in mathematics, mathematics is patterns. It builds on patterns. So if students really understand the content, it's not hard to get to the next point because you understand the pattern. So create space to really understand the mathematics. And some of that, particularly when you have a scripted curriculum, we small changes like 5 whys, wonderful protocol. Well, how did you get that? Or why'd you do that? Or why, right? And just keep and give students the tools to use that with each other. Like we don't always have to be the person at the front doing it. We've given the information, but now I've given you some other tools to question each other to help move the learning.
Yes, I definitely agree. A piece of feedback that I would give to, a newer novice teacher would be around this area would just be, who's doing most of the thinking in your classroom? Really just think about that. And if you respond and you say, well, it's me, then okay, just like what Jennifer said, there's some small tweaks that you can do throughout your lessons to make sure that cognitive load is shifted to the students, because as essentially that's going to allow them to really have a true, deep conceptual understanding of the mathematical practices. So that would be my one liner for a newer novice teacher. Just think about who is doing the thinking in your classroom.
Just one last thing to add to what these brilliant folks said is that focus matters. It's not about covering lots of little ideas separately. It's about really focusing in one idea to help develop understanding in really deep ways where those other ideas. So focus and picking the thing that's most critical that you want students to understand is going to help them learn a whole bunch of other things. And so there's advantage to focus.
So I'm seeing, thank you all. I'm seeing a couple of questions that have popped in. I'm not asking everybody to respond to each of these. But if somebody, Sandra put in a question that, we've just all been talking about this sort of almost like an open version of curriculum and really pushing the students to think. What do you say to teachers who feel like they're being handed a very scripted curriculum and that they can be reprimanded if they don't follow it? What do they do? I'm watching Megan nod her head. I don't know if that
Well,
makes
this
sense.
is true in many of the districts I work in, right? That the curriculum drives. And I guess I would say find a place to start. Where is an opening in the curriculum that you do have that's going to open up that space for students to share their ideas? Almost all curriculum have a little bit of space. Find that little opening. Once we find openings, we can leverage those openings to do other things. Once students start to talk, people start to listen. And then they go, oh, wait, they can talk about that? Maybe we should have students talk about that. And I'm not promising a panacea, you all. It's hard work, but there are openings, I would say, in every curriculum to find a little bit of space to get started and then work as Micah said, work with your colleagues. Do collective work together. Don't try and do it by yourself.
And thank you, Megan. And just being mindful of time, I'm going to ask another question that was put in. So there's a lot of ability grouping that happens, especially in early elementary around reading. And can somebody discuss how this practice affects like belonging, safety, and the high expectations that we've all been talking about?
I'll jump in. So something here that we try to implement is flexible groupings. And so those fixed groups sometimes can negatively impact students' self-efficacy, students' mindset. If like I'm just stuck in this group for the whole entire year, and it does diminish that safe and supportive learning environment. However, going back to one of the core tenets that I presented about is grounding our statements in evidence. Like data usually changes throughout the year. And if you're monitoring throughout the whole entire year and you see that there are opportunities for students that are continuously growing, it's important to mix it up. We have to allow students to learn from one another. And again, just like what my colleague said earlier, is just like there are so many different ways to ignite, engage student thinking. And students come to us with a different set of skills of how they are arriving at a problem. So there's a math norm in my building, like errors are gifts. And so there's not one right way to get to the answer. And so I think that also too is just having that courageous conversation or that reflection as the educator or the administrator about, how is this positively, what's the data saying? How is this positively impacting the school community?
Yeah, may I jump in very briefly here? Amy, I know we're at time. I guess the point I want to make here about belonging as we wrap up is belonging is not assimilation. It's not melting into the community and the norms and the ethos that's been established by adults. Belonging is really about listening to young people, the people who are pushed to the margins the most. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we face as educators. Sometimes we get it wrong, right? On this call, folks have gotten it wrong. People get it wrong, right? And so I think the work of Carla Shalaby, she wrote a book called Troublemakers. And the essential thesis of the text is the very students we should be listening to are the ones we exclude the most because they're telling us of something about the way schools operate, about the way that classroom environment is set up, or the way the school norms are set up and the like. So, as adults, I think we have to create opportunities for young people to give us real time. And when Micah talks about courageous conversations, we got to be courageous listeners and be able to take what we hear, not take it personally, right? But reframe it because as Dr. Banks said, as I will conclude, this work is really about the young people with whom we are working, right? So relax your ego and decide that I'm going to co-create an ethos such that everybody has a fighting chance of being successful up in this space.
And I think ending on that note, Rich, right? This notion that we need to be focusing on our most vulnerable children, and also recognize that we're not always going to get it right, and sometimes we're going to get it wrong, and we need to recognize when we get it wrong, but we also need to keep on trying, because everybody who's on this call, or you wouldn't even be on this call if you didn't think this was important and you didn't think that there was room to grow. So I feel like that's a really strong way to end this. And I want to thank all of the panelists, and I want to thank everybody. And I'm doing this, Micah was going to, but I want to be able to thank Micah. So thank you to all of the panelists. I really want to thank the staff at the Southern Center for Opportunity and Access. It's a joy for the National Academy of Education to get to work with you and to work with all of your colleagues. And all of this will be available after this webinar for people to watch again. We have all the slides, bibliographies that point to all of the different research and so forth that our presenters relied on in making their presentation. And I just want to make a plug for the last webinar in this series, which is on September 17th, and really talks about how school and district level policies and practices can really help support these learning environments for teachers. So thank you to everybody. And I know we're over time, so thank you.
Thank you, everybody.